Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Paula Redding. I am Director of Career Transition with USA Cares. I work with the military who are transitioning out of the service and into the civilian sector. And a lot of what I do is resume building and resume writing. So unlike Trace, who you met in our last session, I don't have a military background. So the reason why I was chosen for this position, or I guess selected, is because I don't have the military background and I can help civilianize the resumes. Resumes are extremely important. That is what you dangle in front of an employer to get you in front of them for an interview. So building a resume, there are some typical steps for the interviewing process. A lot of positions are posted on social platforms such as Indeed, LinkedIn, and Career Builder. We do a lot with LinkedIn. It seems to be the professional Facebook, if you will, but a lot of the organizations will start with LinkedIn and then they'll move over to other platforms. So when you do apply for a position, the positions will be using like an applicant tracking system, which is otherwise ATS. And what happens is when you apply to a position, the organization will track that you've applied. So sometimes if you've applied to a position you weren't selected, but you go to apply to another position, because you were rejected for the one, sometimes you're not accepted into the other one. Other ways that you are selected in the interviewing process is through a recruiter or human resources, or any type of personnel applicant screening. Sometimes they have human resource generalists, but so those are really the different ways that you can apply to a position. So typical steps for the interviewing process is you're either accepted or you're rejected, and it's really a lot of it is based on your resume. So selected applicants will start with a phone screen usually. And now with COVID, they do a lot more of the phone screening. They do a lot more virtual. So, they do also do face-to-face interviews. And then they also do a behavioral assessment once you've passed a certain point of the interviewing process. So the typical steps for the interviewing process is, so part of it, then the final interview, you could have up to 5 or 6 interviews with one organization, depending on the position. Sometimes you will have a panel interview, which is where there may be 3, 4, 5, or 6 individuals who will be asking you questions at the same time, and you'll be in a room with those individuals. Some of them are from, different parts of the organization. Then once you've completed your final interview and you've been selected for the position, they conduct a reference check. So they always ask that you provide 3 forms of ID, or I'm sorry, 3 forms of references, and make sure they're professional references. And when you do that, make sure your references know that you are putting them down as a reference in case they are notified and they're not caught off guard. Once the references are completed, background and drug screening is conducted. Once you've passed all of that, then an offer letter is extended and the onboarding phase then continues. So building a resume is probably the most difficult of process when you're in transition. So some of the employers, what you have to do is understand what the employers expect to see on a resume. So not all not all employers will an ATS. So sometimes the ATS will be for the initial screening, and they'll use keywords and they'll pull it out of your resume like search tools. It's common for employers to receive over 100 applicants per job posting. Employers and recruiters don't like to see, now we've got on here 1 to 3 pages, but really 2-page resume is max. I know when I work with some of our senior leaders, I'll get like a 7 or 8 page resume, and I need to help civilianize that and turn that into 2 pages. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable. But, you know, it really depends on your experience level and what type of position you are applying for. So there's different categories on your resume. You're going to start with skills summary, and then work experience, education, any volunteer work. And then what we recommend is that you use bullet points. Don't put your resume in paragraph form. Recruiters and hiring managers, they only spend about 15 to 20 seconds looking at a resume. And if you don't capture their attention within the 15 or 20 seconds, they're going to go on to the next person. So you really want to capture their attention and use more bullet points and not paragraph formatting. A lot of times the chronological resume format is really preferred over any other type of resume. And you know, you're going to get opinions from everybody on how to write a resume. I get it. You know, everybody has a different format, but we have put together the resume that we do. We've put together with several HR directors, and we put together what they like to see. So what you need to do, you know, make the most of your resume, make it, you know, to the point and not a lot of fluff. Because again, you only have 15 to 20 seconds to capture that person's attention. Make sure you have accurate dates. Make sure your job and education descriptions and data, you know, before you're starting. So if you are you might want to check the job description and add some of those key features, what they're looking for, as bullet points in your resume, providing you actually have the experience. You can conduct job searches in order to identify positions. And again, that goes back to LinkedIn, goes back to Indeed, Career Builder. And a lot of times you can look at those job descriptions to help you with your resume as well. Identify some key words that are going to be recognized by employers and use those in your resume. So if you're looking at a job description and they use the same words 2 or 3 times, you know, like accounting or logistics, data analyst, make sure those key terms, keywords are in your resume, because going back to the ATS, it will scan your resume and pull those words out to help you maybe get through the process a little faster. So identify critical key skills required. The requirement, like education, for instance. A lot of organizations require the education on the resume. So make sure your dates are accurate. Make sure your information is accurate. And then go to, we have a career transition education research tool, which I can actually get to you guys, and if it's something that you would like to do, it's free. It's about 90 minutes, but it does help with career transition. It's just another resource and training tool. So actually it's on my slide here, so you can go on and cut and paste and use that resource as well. So some tips before we start. Okay, so step 1. So make sure a list of all of your keywords from ONET, like any keyword that you have that you want to put in your resume. And I'm going to later on with this presentation, I will actually show you a resume and go over each section with you. But make sure you list all of your keywords. Make sure you list all of your, you know, your job and work experience, your formal and your military education. That is very important that you put that on your resume. Any of your certifications that you have that you've gotten throughout your career in the military, make sure those certifications are on your resume, because some of those can translate nicely into the civilian sector. Any type of organizations that you're a member of or anything that you do volunteer work for, make sure those are on the resume as well. Because employers like to see what you do outside of work too. It's important to kind of get to know who you are as well. The font size, be extra careful that it's not too small. I like to use 11 or 12, and then the margins a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Again, you really want to keep those the resume within 2 pages. But if your font is too small and it's 2 pages, being in the HR industry myself and a recruiter, I wouldn't even look at it, because it's too hard to read and it takes too much time. So make sure that you have your font and your margins set up accordingly. So your resume, going back to the length of your resume, it should not be any more than 2 pages. 1-page resume is ideal. 2 is not a problem whatsoever. It just depends on how many years you have built into your military experience. A summary of your experience. And again, we're going to go through each section on an actual resume, but I'm just going to go through this really quick. And then include a section for your keywords. You're going to have, it's going to be clean and consistent, and make sure it's tailored. Make sure it's well organized. Make sure it's easy to read. And then you need to make sure, and here's where I've had issues before. You need to make sure that your email address is a professional email address. Don't use a military address, but make sure it is a professional email address. I personally like to use Gmail. I used to use Yahoo, and my kids laughed and they said that kind of aged me. So Gmail is great to use, and everybody, you know, actually has access to that. So just make sure your email address is professional. So in the resume, you need to make sure, here are some things that you should not do. Make sure there are no categories missing. Make sure it is generic and unfocused. So you don't want to do that. You want to be very specific on your resume. You don't want to have any lack of your experience or education. So these are everything you shouldn't be doing. Make sure that you're not just following a job description, and that you're not just putting, not just accomplishments, but you're putting a little bit more into that. Make sure it's not hard to understand. So many acronyms that military use, we don't understand. Civilians don't understand at all. And when I go through a resume with some of my senior leaders, I'll go word, sentence by sentence or bullet point by bullet point, and we spend about 3 to 4 hours on a resume per person, because if I don't understand it, the HR director that you are applying a position, if they don't understand it, again, they're just going to put you underneath the pile and say next. Make sure you're honest. Organizations have the right, and sometimes I have seen that they have actually asked for a W-2. So, make sure, and that would be more in line of an interview, but anything that you put in your resume, you have to be able to back it up with proof, okay? Make sure it's aligned right. Make sure the layout is good. The biggest thing, the biggest thing too, are misspelled words and poor grammar. That I would have somebody look over your resume once you've completed it. Have somebody look over it. You're more than welcome to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to go over it with you. But just make sure there's no misspelling and grammar. That will put you at the bottom of the pile for sure. And again, make sure it's not in paragraph form or lengthy phrases or sentences. We just want clean bullet points. So here are some do's and don'ts. So you can design your own. Make sure you use the same font without, or throughout the resume. Use the black texts. Use action verbs. Make sure you're using the keywords. Always send your resume in a PDF format. Don't ever send it in a Word doc because that can be changed. So you can keep a copy of a Word doc and then always convert it into a PDF before you send it. Include a header and a footer. Always include a header, but you should include a footer if it's more than one page. And it would be just as simple, your name and maybe your phone number, or your name and your email address for your footer. Your header should be your name, your phone number, your email address, and your LinkedIn, the link to your LinkedIn profile, because every employer will look at your LinkedIn. One thing, a couple things not to do. Do not use a template. It is so difficult to edit, and you could tell it's a template. Do not use the acronyms. Remember, we said I can't understand a lot of those. And if I can't understand it, or HR individuals are not going to be able to understand any military phrases whatsoever. Do not get creative with your font. It gets to be too busy, and people will lose track when they're trying to read your resume. Don't use colorful text. Your resume should be in black. Do not use colors on your resume. Never include a photo. Don't ever include a photo on a resume. It's just one of those things we don't do. Don't write an I in first person. Do not write an I. And don't speak in third person either. So, just be to the point of what you did. And then don't send them in a Word doc. We already went over that. Always send it in a PDF. So here we go on creating your resume. Okay, so this is going to be your header. And again, I'm going to show you a real resume, and we'll go through all of this as we get to that resume. But in your header, you want to list your name, and then any credentials that you might have, if you're a doctor, and then, anything that, any credentials, I'm sorry, that would go behind your name, make sure you add that as well. Your phone number, make sure that your email or your voicemail on your phone, make sure it's set up, first of all. Make sure your voicemail is not full, and make sure it's a professional message. So many times I've called some of our senior leaders, and their voicemail is not set up, or their voicemail is full. If employers are trying to reach you and they can't leave a message, you could miss out on an opportunity. So make sure it's very professional. Put your email address on your header as well. And again, make sure your email address is an appropriate business type email address. Nothing from like your high school days or anything like that. And then for social media URL, make sure you put your LinkedIn URL in your header of your resume. Everybody will go to that URL before they'll go to your resume probably. So it's very important that you have your social media on there. Do not put your home address on your resume at all. I have a lot of individuals that might live in the Fort Knox area or Radcliffe, and they're applying to positions in Louisville. They have no problems driving to Louisville, but employers might see that they're driving 45 minutes to an hour one way, and they'll get overlooked because of that. They'll say, they're driving too far. They're not going to want this position. So be careful of that as well. So here we have a resume, and as you can see the header, it's got your name, telephone number. I don't think there's really a way for me to make this larger. No, I'm sorry, but there'll probably be another slide where it'll be a little bit bigger. but it'll be your name, phone number, email address, LinkedIn, which is your social media link. No physical address at all. Make sure that's centered at the top of your resume. The next section of your resume is going to be your summary or your objective executive summary. Now in that, you can do, that would be more of a sentence format. That would not be bullet point. So summaries or objectives are, it's not required, but if you list one, make sure that it's brief and to the point. So it might be a couple sentences of what you've done and how maybe you can bring some value to the organization. Make all attempts to use nothing in third person or using the word I too often. So in your executive summary, it's not third person or I. Use power objective words to describe, but don't overdo it. So just be really cautious of some of those power words, but you certainly want to put some of those in there. Then remember, a hiring manager or recruiter, they only spend about 15 to 20 seconds reviewing a resume. And you have to ask yourself when you're writing this executive summary, is it relevant or important to the position that I'm applying to? Now you might have 3 or 4 different resumes, but you're going to start with one resume and it's going to be the core resume of what you're going to use. And then you'll tailor that resume according to a job description that you want to apply for, because you're going to want to put some of those key words in the current resume that you're going to use to apply for a position to show that you have those skill sets. So here's a sample up here of a professional summary. As you see, it's not very wordy, and it just needs to be brief and to the point. It's got to be precise. Again, 2 or 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be your life story. I typically don't read them. I know some HR directors do read the professional summary. I jump directly to the next part. I think what we're going to look at are the key skills. Because I'd rather try and be quick, because again, if I have 100 resumes, I don't have time to read a lot. So you again, if you want to use the summary, you can. If you don't want to, it's optional. It's not going to hurt you if you do or don't have it. So here are the key skills. What I like to do, so you want to implement any of the technical terms you found during the search. So as you're looking at job descriptions and you're finding words that are used a few times within that job description, you want to look at qualifications, but try and pick out what they're really looking for. And as long as you have those key skills and the experience in those key skills, then you need to put them on your resume. And I'll show you in the next slide how it should look on your resume. So this is an area that most hiring managers and recruiters will spend the most time reviewing, because it's really just 1 or 2 words in each bullet. So you might have logistics, you might have organizational development, you might have data analyst, you might have inventory control. Just, those are some key skills. But again, it depends on the position you're trying to apply for. So make sure your key skills are strong so that the hiring manager is going to want to continue reading the resume. And the other thing too is ATS will definitely pick up some of those key words on your resume, because your resumes are really, some of them are scanned into a computer, and the scanner will pick out some of those key words that were from the job description that would be on your resume. So the key skills words are very, very important. And again, there are 1 or 2 words in each bullet, but it's to the point. And again, that's what I look at first. Any technical skills that you have, like, Office Suite or, Microsoft or Excel, but you have to make sure that you're proficient. If you put Excel down there, Microsoft Excel, be sure they're going to ask you, tell me how, you know, what do you know about all the formulas and pivot tables, and, you know, so you have to be proficient in whatever you put in your key skills. Just make sure you're proficient and you can talk about it. And here's the resume with the key skills. So the very first one is going to be your name. It's your header. The second section is your professional or executive summary. And the next section are your key skills. And again, these are really important because that's where I zero in. I'll look at the key skills before anything. So it's really important that you are putting relatable key skills to the job that you're applying to. And again, you know, 3, 4, 5. I'd like to try and see balance on a resume. So if you have 6, you do 2 columns of 6. If you have 8, 2 columns of 4. I like to see that, just that very clear and precise unity on the resume. So the next step, which is the big step, probably going to be your hardest step, is going to be your work experience. You list it in the same format in each position held. So what we like to see, and I'll show you in one of the slides, the very first thing you're going to put on your work experience is your job title. Now, there are software programs, or Google, I believe, has got information you can translate, if you're a military, you can translate some of your military job titles into the civilian sector. Make sure you stay away from HR. Make sure you stay away from operations. HR in the military sector, it does not really translate at all into the civilian sector. So make sure you try and stay away from HR altogether. You know, you could put personnel development, personnel management, but stay away from HR. So you put your job title, and then now I like to do it a little different than what this says, but I put your job title and then tab over and put the dates. Job title I like to see in bold, because that's really what I'm looking for, is bold. And then below that, you can put your company name and the location. So, you know, United States Army, various locations, and I'm just using that as an example. And then the dates of employment will tab all the way over. But I like to see the job title bold, and then the company name and location below that, just in regular font. List any relevant employment, and then don't exceed more than 15 years. So, you know, I work with service members that are 30 years in the military, and I just tell them to go back 15 years. However, if the position you're applying for requires certain skill sets that you have, that you did like 20 years ago or 17 years ago, then yes, go on and put that. It would be relevant, and you make sure you put that on the resume. But if there's no relevance to what you did beyond 15 years, then I would not put it on the resume. Use short descriptions in these bullets, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. And then what you do is you'll list the bullets underneath the job title, and you know, you might have 4 or 5 bullets in each job description. And again, look at the job position that you're applying to and see if any of the skill sets that you have are on that job description. Don't put it word for word, but try and incorporate their job description into your resume as long as you have that skill set, because they're going to ask you for examples. And then make sure you don't use any military acronyms that civilians and employers won't understand. And then make sure when you do your resume, and this is something that I do with everybody that I work with, it's not, you know, the exercise is not just to have you write your resume. I don't write resumes for everybody. I just help with them, okay? But it really is to give you confidence in understanding your skill set and how it transfers into the civilian sector. So last thing you want to do is go into an interview, and the HR manager, the hiring manager asks you a question on your resume, and you can't describe what it means. You know, yes, it says you were, you know, data analyst and inventory control, you know, blah, blah, blah. But in the military, it's really something else. Just make sure you're really confident in your resume. Make sure you can talk about your resume with confidence, without saying a lot of ums. Geez, I don't know how to explain that. Just make sure you're extremely confident. And again, if you ever need help with anything, let me know. I'm more than happy to help. So down here in this slide is the format that we use, the work experience, and you'll see there's maybe 3 or 4 bullets in under each job title and work experience. So it's not lengthy at all. This happens to be, I believe, a 1-page resume, but it's, you know, it's not lengthy at all. You can say what you need to say. Sometimes less is more, because really your resume is a dangling carrot to get you into an interview. Once you're in the interview, then you can say anything you want as far as, you know, you can explain your resume a little bit better. And if there are things that are not on your resume that you feel is relevant to the position, then the interview is the time to talk about that. So your resume, again, is a dangling carrot to get you in the door. So education. List all formal education, both civilian and military, that's considered to be like formal school that offers degree. List your certifications. If your certifications are relatable to the position, definitely make sure that you list your military certifications. Avoid listing schools that aren't relevant to the position, though. So if you have a certification that's not relevant, then don't put it on the resume. List it in the same format: the name of the school, location, degree, certification, and title, and the dates of completion. It's pretty much the same format as your experience, work experience. Grade point average, that's a tricky one. It's optional. If you feel you've got a good enough grade point average, you know, 3.5 higher, 3.7, 3.8, then go on and put it on there. But if it's anything really below, I don't recommend putting it on there. Ensure that you have supporting documentation for any schools listed. A lot of organizations now will ask for your not only your degree, but your I can't think of the word. Gosh, I literally just went blank. But your degree, they're going to ask to see your grades, and I know there's a word for it, but it totally slipped my mind. I'm sorry. But they're going to want to see your grades. They're going to want to see your GPA. They're going to want documentation proving that you actually did go to school, that you actually did get a degree from that school. So make sure that you have that with you, or actually not with you, but if they ask you for it, you're going to have to present that to them. And then down below here is where the education and certifications are listed. One thing I want to say, try to stay away from words like combat and anything that deals with like guns or anything that's going to raise a red flag. Organizations, especially nowadays, are very sensitive to some of the military terms and words. And so we always try to stay away from some of those words because it could scare people. So we really try to keep those off of the resume. And you don't need to put it on there at all anyway. So now for the footer. So insert the footer and include your name and phone number, and you can include an email address. So if you have more than one page, this is really helpful because your second page will not have a header. It'll just have the footer. And that'll help, again, if there's more than one page, just if something gets misplaced or, you know, out of order. You'll only use electronic. So in most cases, you're only going to use an electronic format for your resume. You really will only print the resume when you go on an interview. Always take a few copies of the resume with you when you go to an interview. Make sure that the resume that you take with you is the actual resume that you presented when you applied to the position, because that's the resume that they know, and that's what they're going to ask you questions off of. So a lot of times when you apply for a position, you're going to download your resume in a PDF format, and you're going to include that in your application. When you go to into an interview, I always take 4 copies. I recommend 4 copies because you never know if you're going to have a panel interview. You never know if you're going to meet team interviews. Always make sure this one says 2 to 3, but I would take about 4 copies with you. And again, only the resume that you sent in with the application is the resume that you should take with you. Make sure though that you go back and you review your resume. Make sure that everything is listed the way it's supposed to be listed. Make sure the spacing is right. Make sure the grammar is right. Make sure all the information is accurate. And make sure that, you know, just make sure you understand your resume. I think that's the hardest part for anybody who is in the military, who is transitioning out into the civilian sector. The hardest thing is to understand that your skill sets are transferable, and it's really hard to understand, and it's going to take time. It takes a lot of time to understand your resume and how your skill set transfers over. But that is very important, that you go into an interview with confidence and that you know your resume. So again, ask 2 or 3 individuals that you trust. Have them look at your resume before you send it. The last thing you want to do is send any resume that has an error, because you can't retract that. You can't get that back. So make sure that you have somebody look at your resume. Make sure you have them, open for suggestions. Let them tell you, maybe this sentence sounds weird, or grammar is incorrect, spelling is incorrect. But really take a look at it. And again, you're going to get advice from 50 people with 50 different ways to write a resume. I totally get it. This format, again, is a format that we have put together with several HR professionals and hiring managers. And we've compiled this resume and the steps of this resume, and we put it together, and it really does work. We use it for all of our senior leaders and our fellowship programs, and it really works. One thing to remember too, if you're sending your resume out and you're not getting any phone calls to set up any interviews, then there's something wrong with the resume. And then you're going to have to look at your resume again and try to figure out what's wrong with it. Because again, your resume is a dangling carrot that gets you into an interview. But if you're not getting any calls, then it's the resume, because that's their first impression. Your resume is going to be their first impression of you. So make sure that resume is exactly how it needs to be. And if you have to change it up, change it up. If what you're doing isn't working, then maybe you need to change the descriptions of your experience. But the format is a good format. I highly recommend this format. So this is really the whole resume right here. Again, if it's more than 1 page, make sure you use a footer. And you can insert the footer with your phone number and or email address. But again, this is a 1-page resume right here. It's got the header and then your professional summary. Make sure like your titles, like professional summary, key skills, work experience, and then education. Make sure those words are in bold, and I would put those in all caps. I know we said to use the same font size, but those should be in all caps. Just those particular titles just so that it separates one section to the next. So professional skill, or your professional summary, key skills, your work experience, and then education certifications. Those words need to be bold, and I would capitalize those. So in summary, the information, again, it's collected from several experienced hiring managers and HR managers. So, you know, we've tried to create a format that is easy to read, straight and to the point. There's really no guarantee that you're going to get an interview with, you know, like I said, you're going to get 50 different recommendations on how to write a resume. But, you know, just remember that if you're not getting an interview, then you need to change up the resume. But this is a really good format. It's very simple to read. You know, everybody has their own style and preferences, but again, we have worked on this resume for years, and we feel we've perfected it. Again, make sure all of the information that you're putting on your resume is accurate. Make sure you can back up that information. You know, have supporting documents for whatever qualifications and experience that you put on your resume. Make sure that you have backup and that you can validate what you said. You know, it's really easy. I recommend putting a lot of quantifiable information on a resume. So if you were, you know, responsible for $5 million worth of equipment and you were at 100% accountability and you know, without loss, make sure you have documentation. You don't have to take it with you on an interview. You don't have to include it in a resume. That's not what I'm saying. But if you go in and they talk to you and say, hey, can you send me some information on how you did this or what you did, you're going to need to support those documentations and give that to them. And then again, you know, have others double check your grammar, double check your spacing. You know, don't use a format. Don't use any type of formatting when you're doing your resume. It's just, it makes it more difficult to edit and follow. So, you know, create your own formatting. Don't use pre-formatted resumes. And then, you know, you're always welcome to submit your resume to me. If you want me to look at it, I'm more than happy to do that. I'm more than happy to help. You know, again, the resume is the first step to get you in the door, to get you into an interview, whether it's a phone interview, whether it's a face-to-face interview. And, you know, employers don't spend much time looking at resumes, and, you know, that they're looking at an initial screening doesn't take very long. But, you know, as long as you are truthful on your resume, use this format, have backup information to support whatever you have said, have somebody look at it. But again, understanding your resume, understanding how your skill sets transfer into the civilian sector is half the battle, because you want to go into these interviews with confidence. Now, don't oversell yourself, because if they ask you a question, you can't answer it, then you're not going to get very far. So just make sure you're honest. And, you know, I've even said to some of my military service members that I work with, I've even said to them, you know, when you go into an interview, and if you haven't interviewed in years, let's just say, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, just go into the interview and start with that. Just say, gosh, you know, I'm really nervous. I haven't interviewed in 15 years, and that kind of breaks the ice. And then they'll look at your resume, and they might not be as hard on you the first interview, but I know we talked about interviewing too. It's not unusual to have 5 or 6 interviews, but you're also there's a chance that you'll get asked to come back in to meet the team, and the team wants to interview you. Everybody says to me, what does that have to do with getting me hired by the hiring manager? Why do I have to meet the team? Well, you have to, it's that likability factor. So if your resume gets you through and you get an interview and you go through the process of the background checks and the reference checks, and they really like you and they're ready to go on and hire you, and they say to you, hey, I want you to come in and meet your team. If that team doesn't like you, then they're not going to hire you. So just remember that. But back to the resume. Again, it's a dangling carrot to get you in the door. Make sure you understand it with confidence and that you can talk about your resume. If you ever need anything at all, feel free to reach out to us at USA Cares. Reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Paula Redding, and I'm more than happy to help. Any questions that I can answer while we're here still?
Yes, Paula, you touched on it a couple times already, but what would you recommend, or what would be a good resources or steps to take for someone who is really struggling to translate their military experience?
Well, I honestly would, again, they can talk to me. I am more than happy to help them. But if they know somebody who is in the HR field, they might be able to reach out to somebody in the HR field that doesn't have military background. But it is very difficult to translate these resumes, these military resumes. There are, I know you can Google like the titles of military titles to civilian titles. And then once you get a civilian title, you can always go on like LinkedIn and look up the jobs and look up a civilian title of that job and look and see what that job description is. And some of those job descriptions might trigger, some of the responsibilities might trigger, hey, gosh, I did that. In the military, we just called it something different. And that can help you translate your resume as well. But I really think that talking to somebody, again, that does not have military experience could help you translate your resume. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time. It's not something that is going to be done, in an hour. Okay, I spend 3 and 4 hours per person on a resume because I want them to understand it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Sure. There's actually another question in the chat.
I saw that.
Read it. Do you have any suggestions for if I have a gap in my work experience?
Yes. So is your gap in the work experience, is it because of military or is it civilian gap? That will make a difference. If it's civilian, okay. So I guess depending on what the situation is and how big of a gap there is, again, it just depends on the gap. Sometimes people will go back to school. Sometimes people will be starting a family. And sometimes people have to take care of a family member. So I don't know if any of those could be reasons, but the gap would be in conversation. Again, if there's a huge gap, you might want to even add on your resume, like a little blurb in the resume if you took 10 years off, let's just say, or 3 years off to go to school. Again, if your school dates are on there, was it a school situation, if I can ask? For the gap? Okay, perfect. So that's perfect. So when you put you've got your civilian work experience on there with your dates, make sure the dates in your education line up, because When I look at a resume, the very first thing I look at, of course, key skills, but I also look at dates. And I don't look at military resumes the same way I look at civilian. Civilian resumes, I will look at dates and define if there are any gaps. If there is a gap, I immediately look at education. And if it shows that you were in school during that gap, then that would explain it. Now, if you are if you're in school and you are scheduled to graduate, let's just say in 2023 with a bachelor's degree, I would put on your resume, University of Louisville, Bachelor of Arts, 2018, and then I would put projection completion to 2023. So it shows that gap that you're in school, but you have to make sure those dates line up with your gap. Did that answer your question? Did that help you? Great. Yeah, and if you need help with that, reach out. I'm more than happy to help you with that. And we can talk further about that if you need to. What else can I answer? Do you think I covered everything? Is there anything else that you want me to go over?
I think that's it, unless we have any other questions in the chat, but I don't see any right now. Then that should be it. Thank you so much.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. And again, reach out to me anytime if you need any assistance whatsoever. I'm happy to help you.